So, hello everyone. This is Puya Hamami, Senior Healthcare Analyst at Edison Group, and we are pleased to have us with us today Ian Crosbie, the CEO of Sequana Medical, to help provide an update on the company's recent progress and clinical data. Thank you for joining us today, Ian.
Hey, good afternoon, and thank you very much for inviting me.
It's great. Thank you. Now, Ian, you've recently reported positive top-line results from the long-anticipated study, POSEIDON, the POSEIDON North American pivotal study for the alfapump system in patients with recurrent and refractory ascites. Please elaborate on the top-line data, which convincingly met the predetermined efficacy thresholds, and also on how the demonstrated capability to reduce the frequency of therapeutic paracentesis can be vitally important for patients given the current treatment landscape.
Great. Now, this is hugely exciting for the company, but also for the liver ascites population worldwide. As you may recall, the primary efficacy endpoint for this POSEIDON study was based upon the ability to reduce the need for therapeutic paracentesis, that is, external drainage with a needle after the alfapump implant compared to the time before the alfapump implant. And we're very proud to say that we substantially exceeded the predefined thresholds for study success. There were really two criteria here. The first was we had a 100% median reduction in the frequency of therapeutic paracentesis with a highly statistical significant result there. Secondly, the second endpoint here was we had 77% of patients had a 50% reduction post-implant versus pre-implant, and there the predefined threshold was 50%. So again, we substantially exceeded that endpoint. This is crucially important for these patients who are devastated by this terrible condition. These are patients whose life is dominated by their bellies filling up with fluid, the pain, the problems, the impact on their quality of life, and the need to regularly go to hospitals to have this painful and burdensome procedure of therapeutic paracentesis. So in this study, we showed that we could drastically reduce the need for this, drastically reduce this fluid accumulation and the burden on these patients. So as well as for Sequana, we clearly exceeded the predefined endpoints, but for these patients, it opens up the prospect of a therapeutic option here, which we believe will transform their lives.
So much more independence, I assume.
Absolutely. These patients, many of them are never going to go and run in the Olympic Games. But for them, these patients want to enjoy their remaining years of their life. They want the simple pleasures that many of us take for granted here. They want the ability to go out and visit friends. They want the ability to travel, go and see grandchildren, maybe go and see those places in the world that they've always wanted to do. I was with doctors this weekend, and they were talking about their patients in the study. One of them had been to visit a country in Europe, and another one had taken a boat trip for several weeks. These are things that would have been unheard of prior to having an alpha pump implanted. And that's the simple things. They want to be able to go in the garden. They want to go and cook. They want to go and see friends. They want to do the travels, all the things that the need for regular drainage and this accumulation of huge amounts of fluid prohibits for them.
Okay, it's very promising for those patients. In terms of the safety profile, how was the alfapump safety profile in POSEIDON, and how did the results line up with your expectations going into the study?
No, so absolutely. The primary safety endpoint was absolutely in line with our expectations for this study here. If I could quote Professor Wong, who is one of the principal investigators for the study, the safety data regarding the primary safety endpoint are in line with expectations and reassuring for the potential of the alfapump as a long-term treatment in this patient population. This is a patient population with many problems associated with the disease. They are immunocompromised. They often have significantly impaired renal function there. So this is not a patient group who are generally well, but despite that, we managed to deliver a therapy which was in line with the safety profile for this patient group, and we believe offers a good therapeutic alternative for these patients going forward.
Mhm. Please remind us a little bit more about the refractory ascites population in terms of like how common the condition is, how prevalent it is, and especially how the rising prevalence of Nash may become a significant driver for future growth.
No, that's a really important point here. This is a disease that has been overlooked for far too long. Our livers are wonderful organs. Doesn't matter how you attack the liver, whether it is with alcohol, whether it is with a virus, or now whether you attack it with fat as part of NASH, but that causes scarring of the liver. That scarring is what is known as liver cirrhosis. And that impedes the blood flow through the liver, and cleaning of the blood is one of the liver's vital tasks here. So as you start to get increasing number of patients with NASH, we're going to see a mainstream part of the population now suffering with the terrible implications of their disease, and with refractory and recurrent ascites being one of the major complications of this disease. We estimate that today in the US and Canada, there are over 60,000 patients who have to have repeated drainages because of their liver cirrhosis here. So these are patients who have their lives significantly disrupted by the need for drainages to deal with this accumulation of fluid. And because NASH is such a fast growing disease, we see the market growing over the next couple of decades at 6 to 7% annually. Hepatitis is going to disappear, thank goodness, from the US market, we believe. Alcohol will continue to grow, and if anything, growth within the market here. But NASH, or the complication of fatty liver disease, that is growing exceptionally fast, and we see that continuing to develop here. So that's going to be a key theme, and we see that growth continuing for at least a couple of decades. And we see the potential for the alfapump reaching over $2 billion a year by 2032.
So that's a very large untapped market that the sort of with the alfapump. And now looking again at the next stage for the alfapump in North America, with POSEIDON primary endpoint data now complete, what are the next steps that are required prior to filing a U.S. pre-market approval application? And when do you expect the product to be launched in North America? And I guess relating to this, what sort of pre-commercial activities are you planning? And maybe just give us an overview of your commercial strategy in terms of which health providers you'll be targeting in North America, for example.
Great. That's a lot of points within that question. So let's make sure I try and not forget any there. There are two real aspects to the next steps of our activities. We've been laser focused on completing this study over the last few years. So now we are turning our attention to completing the other aspects of the PMA, the filing we need to make with the FDA for hopefully marketing approval for this product. There are many technical aspects of this approval that need to be completed. We need to complete many of the testing on the device itself, and that goes into the submission here as well as things, for example, such as usability testing, to make sure that the controller and the programmer are appropriately designed for the users of this device going forward here. So those are the aspects that go into the PMA, but separately we're doing those pre-commercial aspects that you mentioned here. We're going to be out there raising awareness of the device with the community here. Refractory ascites has been overlooked as a disease for far too long. And I think the reason we got breakthrough device designation by the FDA was a recognition of the fact that the disease is changing from alcohol and hepatitis now to alcohol and fatty liver disease. In fact, for the first time, to our understanding, there is actually a registry going on sponsored by a group of highly qualified clinicians in the United States, the North American Consortium for the Study of End-Stage Liver Disease, looking at the burden of refractory ascites on North American patients, looking at the impact on quality of life, the clinical complications, and in fact the cost of this to society. So we are sponsors of that study and will be excited to see the results of that hopefully will highlight the major problems for society out there. So that's really in terms of raising the awareness among the general community. our commercial strategy here in North America is to commercialize the alpha pump ourselves directly to the hepatologists. A few reasons for doing this. The first is that there is no existing medical device sales force, to our awareness, focused on the North American hepatologist market. Hepatologists are used to working with drugs. They don't have any other high-value medical devices being commercialized to them. It's a different customer group to the ones that pacemakers call on, and you have to have a sales force that is knowledgeable about the disease, knowledgeable about the treatment solution that we offer, and knowledgeable about the alternative treatment options out there from a medical device point of view. So therefore, we're going to be establishing our own highly focused, specialized sales force. It doesn't need to be that large because under the treatment guidelines, all patients in North America that start with ascites must be referred for a liver transplant. There are only 140 of those centers in the United States. So we will start off by focusing our calling efforts on those transplant centers there. And as the market develops and grows, we can expand beyond there. But for the first few years, just focusing on those markets will be an excellent and very efficient means of getting to the vast majority of that audience with the clinicians that understand those patients and the clinicians that want to offer an increased range of treatment solutions. So we will be going direct. It gives us best control over this market, allows us to capture the full economic value here, and it allows us also to get first-hand feedback from customers so that we can tailor our clinical messaging and making sure that we're really targeting the needs of our customers.
Yeah, well, thank you for the detailed response on the commercial opportunity. Now, the alfapump has been available in Europe for several years now. It hasn't demonstrated the market growth that may have been expected in that area initially. What gives you the confidence that the product will get much more traction in North America?
No, I think that's an excellent point there. We have been on the market for a number of years in Europe, but to be honest, our activity in Europe has really been focused on getting the bugs out of the system. There has never been a medical device that has been launched and got it right first time. There has always been issues that need to be refined and developed to improve the performance of the system. And that's exactly what we've been doing over recent years. But the reason why we believe the US market will be a highly lucrative commercial one for us really comes down to two reasons. The first one is Nash itself. In the US, obesity and therefore fatty liver disease and Nash are probably 15 to 20 years ahead of where we are in Europe. We see a different diet, we see a different form of exercise, a different genetic makeup. And therefore, we see the US and Canada far ahead of where Europe is. And we see Nash as being a key driver of this, not only in growth, but also in social acceptability and messaging with regards to refractory ascites and attitudes to liver cirrhosis. Take the example of the stent market and the accumulation of fat in arteries there. There is no longer a stigma in the United States about having a stent fitted. It has become a mainstream clinical disease. We see exactly the same pattern happening in North America for liver cirrhosis, where the need to have treatment for liver cirrhosis will become mainstream and therefore accepted and therefore become a standard of care here. A second aspect here, I believe, is unfortunately really relates to the attitudes towards quality of life treatments in Europe compared to the US. And here I refer to the great example of Axonics. I'm sure many of your listeners will know the Axonics story. This is the implantable device for dealing with urinary incontinence here. That product was approved in the same year in the US as it was approved in Europe. I think it was 2018. And first year of sales was in the US was about $8 million. In Europe was about $3 million. 2022, US sales of this device are going to be approaching $200 million, and European sales of the device are still at $3 million here. So we believe there's fundamentally a difference in how clinicians treat quality of life. It is crucial. If you can't cure these patients, managing their quality of life aspects for the remainder of their time is the best medical care that you can provide. And we believe in the US system, there is a real focus on that with clinicians, and we absolutely believe that they will embrace the alpha pump as providing appropriate care for these patients. Look, I think hopefully attitudes will change in Europe moving forward based upon the expected success in the US market. But for now, the US market is plenty big for us, and our focus now is on a strong commercial launch and ongoing penetration of this large and very fast-growing market.
Okay. Well, thank you for that explanation. Now, since we spoke last year, we had our last Edison TV interview, there has been an evolution in the company's positioning from primarily describing itself as a medical devices company to now having a broader focus on treating fluid overload. And now this is particularly apparent in your other program, the DSR heart failure program. Please explain how this shift has arisen and how the interim data from the Sahara study earlier this year led to a refinement in the DSR development strategy to one that is no longer tied to a required medical device.
Great. So the liver program, what you've just been discussing, remains a medical device program very clearly. We are pumping fluid from the abdomen into the bladder, patient urinates it away. On heart failure, that program has evolved because of the exceptionally strong results from our program. In both of these programs, what ties them together is the fact that too much fluid in the body leads to serious clinical problems. In liver disease, the fluid is accumulated in the abdomen. So just like if you had a flood in your apartment, you would pump that wastewater down the drain to get rid of it. If, however, you have a coat that is soaked from being out in the rain, you can't drain that water away. You have to extract the water from all over that coat. That is similar to the situation in heart failure. In heart failure, the fluid is distributed all across the body. And in this case, we work with the kidneys to help extract the fluid from the body by driving sodium out of the body and then working with the kidneys to bring the balance of sodium and water in the body back into balance by the kidneys eliminating the excess fluid from all over the body. When we began the heart failure program, the DSR program, direct sodium removal, we thought that the benefit of our treatment would be relatively short-lived, that we would treat a patient, that we would take out sodium from the body, we would restore the health of the kidney for a little while. But once we stopped treating them, we believe that the body would very quickly revert back to its prior state. Again, accumulating fluid and sodium, the congestion, which is what it's called in heart failure, returning. But what we have seen over the last year, and our business does move fast, it's amazing to think it was just a year ago now, but what we have seen is that 3 to 4 weeks of treatment with our DSR therapy, we believe provides a lasting effect of at least 6 to 12 months here. So once we treat these patients and then stop treating them, we believe the body has recovered sufficiently to manage the disease itself. The health of the heart and the kidney has improved so much that the kidney is again now able to handle the fluid and sodium balance in the body, and therefore the body doesn't accumulate sodium like it did before, and therefore you don't need these high doses of diuretics and you don't need ongoing DSR therapy. We see it as a therapy that with 3 to 4 weeks of treatment provides 6 to 12 months of benefit here. It may be possible to repeat that therapy again. We haven't demonstrated that, but there is certainly optimism in that area coming from the researchers here. So given the fact that we don't need to treat these patients beyond the 3 to 4 weeks, it doesn't make sense to leave patients with this piece of mechanical equipment inside them. Patients want to be treated and to be told their treatment is now finished. So the idea is that we would just now use a simple peritoneal dialysis catheter. It's been used thousands of times. Doctors know very simply how to put it in and how to take it out. Patients would have one of these catheters fitted. They would then be treated for 3 to 4 weeks. And at the end of that treatment, the catheter would be removed. Patients would have no ongoing obligations in terms of looking after the device, having to charge it, having to be worried about any complications that may develop. And that makes for a simpler life for those patients and their doctors. It also makes for a simpler regulatory path when it comes to ourselves for development. We don't have to go with a drug device combination through the FDA. It is simple, a drug process here. And as doing that, that's a more straightforward development route. We believe it is faster, and it will get this product hopefully on the market much faster, generating acceptance. And once we get the acceptance from the clinical community, who knows how this program will develop going forward. But the benefits we have shown in terms of managing fluid and sodium balance, improving cardiorenal health, and restoring the ability of the kidneys to naturally manage the disease really warrant the fastest possible development program here and route to market. So yes, we are a device and a drug company combined here, but what we are focused on is bringing the best and most appropriate solution to patients here and improving patient outcomes here. And as a result, we believe that that is the right way to drive value at our company.
Mhm. Well, I mean, going back to that Sahara interim data, because here we have patients who have our maximum loop direct therapy, and even with that, they still have persistent congestion. Maybe you can just share with us how in that study so far you've shown how the DSR therapy can reduce the need for loop direct therapy for not just for a short term, but also for a prolonged period, and how that improved cardiorenal parameters.
Absolutely. So what we saw in these patients, as you mentioned, having in heart failure, fluid overload is a key problem, and diuretics are the standard of care, Lasix or furosemide here. The problem is many of these patients no longer respond to that care. So here in the Sahara study, we were looking at a group we're studying up to 10 patients in this study. We've released the first interim data here that showed with these patients, we treated them very intensively for, say, 3 to 4 weeks. But they started off with an excess of fluid. They were admitted to hospital because they had decongested. They were fluid overloaded and their drugs couldn't remove this. What we showed is with 1 week of treatment, we could effectively remove that congestion. We were shifting about 12 to 15 pounds of fluid within that first week of care. We continued to treat them over the next 3 to 4 weeks. And over those 3 to 4 weeks, what we saw was a dramatic improvement in their heart failure measurements. Natriuretic peptides are the measure of heart failure, and we saw that fall by about 30% in these patients. We saw a stable renal function, which is a great result because normally when you shift that much fluid, you expect the kidney to suffer substantially and you see renal function decline. But in this case, we saw renal function remaining constant. We also, in these patients, when we began the study, it was very clear they had diuretic resistance. By the end of the study, they were diuretically normal, which meant the kidney responded to diuretics the way it should and enabled the body to manage the fluid balance of these patients without external intervention here. So we were really hitting the trifecta here. We were getting rid of the congestion, we're improving the cardiorenal substrate, and we're enabling the body to handle the disease once more itself. Obviously, once we stopped treating these patients, they still had heart failure, yeah, and previously we'd expected that their need for loop diuretics to bounce back up. And that was where we began when we designed the program several years ago. But what we learned last year in both Red Desert and Sahara is it doesn't bounce back. Particularly in Sahara, we see these patients 6 to 12 months out, they are on very manageable doses of loop diuretics, dramatically lower than where they were before, maybe 10 to 20% of their starting dose in this study here. And that is something that these patients can manage. But we don't care about the cost of the diuretics. Diuretics are cheap. Right. But what that means is that represents a dramatic improvement of cardiorenal health. They don't need the drugs because they're in a fundamentally better condition. A couple of other things that came out of this work were New York Heart Association has a scale of heart failure from 1 to 4, with 4 being the most severe. In the Red Desert and Sahara study, all patients saw their New York Heart Association score fall by at least one class. So that's a very dramatic 100% responder analysis into a one class reduction. There is also a model called the Seattle Heart Failure Model, which is a very well validated market, got thousands and thousands of reference patients in here. And that is a predictor. You take patient symptoms and it can highly accurately predict the expected survival of those patients. So we did this for patients in both Red Desert and Sahara before treatment and post-treatment. And what we saw was looking at their 1 year mortality, so the proportion of patients that were expected to be dead within 1 year, we saw that proportion fall by 75%. So instead of about 20% of those patients forecast to be dead at 1 year, it was less than 5%. So we are delivering real, clear, dramatic clinical prospects for these patients here. So that's what's so highly exciting about this program.
Yeah, well, that is very exciting. If they can demonstrate some improved survival tendencies, that would be very, very key for this population. Now, looking at the next step of development, of course, for the DSR program is the Mojave US Phase 1b/2a study that will be studying a new formulation, a new product, DSR 2.0, in a US population in a randomized controlled study. How do you expect this new DSR 2.0 product to provide differentiation or benefit compared to the earlier formulation that was studied in the Sahara and Red Desert studies? And what are the key timelines that you expect for the Mojave study for it to go forward?
So let's start with talking about DSR 2.0. Although we talk about it as being a drug program, we have the simplest possible approach to operating as a drug. All we are doing with DSR is we are removing sodium from the body by using diffusion through the peritoneal cavity. So a very simple technique. We are not relying upon inhibiting pathways. We are not relying upon any metabolism of the product here. We are not a promoter. We're not a blocker. We are very simply working with diffusion here. DSR1 and DSR2 work in exactly the same manner in pulling sodium out of the body. The only difference between the two is the way in which they do it, or the rate, in fact, at which they do that. DSR 1.0 is a very aggressive remover of sodium from the body. It moves sodium over really about a 2-hour time span and moves it in a very rapid manner, which puts a lot of pressure on the kidneys to balance up the fluid levels within the body, which is okay in the hands of experts like Dr. Testani, who we work with from Yale. He can control the dosing very carefully on these patients and deliver excellent outcomes. But that doesn't work in the hands of a broad clinical community. So the benefit of DSR 2.0 is it works in a slower and stronger manner. Instead of being in the body for 2 hours, this is meant to be in the body for 24 hours and moves more sodium, but over a longer period of time. And by moving it more slowly, the kidney has more time to keep up with managing the fluid removal from the body, and therefore the risk of electrolyte imbalance or hyponatremia is dramatically reduced here. And we believe this is the product that is best suited for use in the broader commercial uptake going forward here. Although both products are covered by our strong and very granted patents that are granted in both US and Europe, there has never been a sodium-free version of icodextrin, which is one of the key components of our product, on the market. So the second generation product, DSR 2.0, has, we believe, extremely strong intellectual property protection here. But also it has this better therapeutic and safety profile that we believe is the right product for the commercial uptake going forward. And coming back to your second part here, which was about Mojave, in Mojave, we're effectively looking to recreate what we showed in Sahara, but this time in a US patient population and using 2.0. As I mentioned, DSR 2.0 we believe works in the same manner as DSR 1.0, so that risk can be is very much mitigated, we believe. The second part is the US patient population. Look, there are differences between nations, and there are differences between medical practice here. This study will also be a randomized controlled trial. Sahara was a single-arm, non-randomized trial. Mojave will be a multi-center randomized controlled trial. So now we will see the first time we'll be seeing real differences between treatment groups here in a well-structured US trial. And we believe that the data from this trial is the one that will help us then establish a partnership with a major player in the heart failure space for further development and then ultimately commercialization of this program. Timing, we expect to get the study underway in the first half of next year, with interim data being reported in second half of next year and top-line data following the year after.
And I think, as you mentioned, there may be potentially business development or monetization or out licensing opportunities at an interim data point next, in the second half. Is that correct?
I think our plan with heart failure, the DSR program, is to work with a strategic partner on this program. It is too big. This program has too much opportunity. And heart failure is a vast space with massive unmet needs. In fact, I don't know if I mentioned, but heart failure is the #1 cause of admissions in patients over 65 in the United States. So heart failure is a major problem, and 90% of those hospitalizations are due to fluid overload. And there are few effective treatment options once diuretics don't work. So this is an enormous opportunity there. And for Sequana, we believe it is best to realize the full value of that market by working with an existing major player within that market. Can help us bring that forward and balance our risk and reward within the company. We are going to be very busy with the effective commercialization of liver, so we think partnering on the heart failure side is the right balance of risk and reward here going forward. Whether we announce a program on interim data or final data, it's to be determined. I think it really depends on the strength of the data coming up and how third parties view our program. We will partner it at the appropriate time that we believe we can get best value for it. And as we start seeing the data from Mojave coming through, we hope and fully expect that there'll be good strategic interest in this program.
And you mentioned, of course, that aspect of risk and reward just now. And I guess relating to that on a broad level, where do we see Sequana's resources and financing runway moving forward? And how do you see your access to capital over the next 1 to 2 years or so?
Look, we're all very, very aware of the current market environment. This has been a very difficult period for companies like Sequana, really over the last 15 to 18 months here. And I've got no crystal ball to predict when that situation will end. So we know access to capital remains difficult for companies like ours. We have a financing runway into the third quarter of next year, but we do continue to need capital to grow the company, to make those long-term decisions, to realize the value that I've been describing on this call here. Traditionally, we have done that through raising of additional equity, and we also recently took on some growth debt. So we continue to look at all options, both dilutive and non-dilutive, to help us reach our goal here. But we have to make sure the company is well financed, to make sure that we can then robustly make the right choices to maximize shareholder value within our programs.
But altogether, it's certainly an exciting opportunity with these two programs for Sequana Medical. Maybe you can just summarize some of the key highlights and catalysts that you expect over the next 12 to 18 months.
No, thank you for that. Thank you for the invitation today. These are areas that have been overlooked by the clinical community and by the life sciences community and by investors for far too long. So it's great to be highlighting the market potential here, but also offering real improvements in clinical outcomes for patients here. In terms of milestones for the liver program, the alfapump program, it's now going to be focused on submission of the PMA next year, and then hopefully approval for the product in the second half of 24, so we can get on the North American market and start delivering the product to patients there. In heart failure program, the next step, the imminent next step, is going to be reporting the top line data from Sahara. I gave you the highlights, but now we'll be looking at really the top line data here from all patients. And then the next step will be getting underway with the Mojave study, the US study. So getting that study underway first half of next year, and then interim data from that program eagerly awaited in the second half of next year. So those are the key highlights. We continue to drive clinical data. We've had great success over the last few years, and we don't see any reason why that will change in the coming years.
That's great. Well, thank you very much for joining us today, Ian. And we really look forward to catching up with you as the company advances on its programs. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.